Yomi for Shabbos Kodesh, Parshas Vayera, 5784. Also, we're going to do Aschola. We're going to say the Daf Yomi, also on Motzi Shabbos at Bava Malka at 9 p.m. on Motzi Shabbos. So that's the Daf Yomi, but we'll record it, put it on the YouTube, and hopefully we'll do it again and again and again. We'll know it better and better and better. So Bava Kamma Beis Amid Aleph, Arba Avos Nezikin. And we know that there are four types of categories where we do damage, four primary categories which were responsible for the damage. The shore, an ox, a boar, a pit, a mave. We're going to discuss what a mave is. It's either a human or a tooth, and heather, fire. The Gemara is going to discuss these categories, but already the Darshanim say there are avos nezikin that have done destruction to the Jewish people throughout our history. Four primary sources of damages, and all the different types, they've all done hezek to the Jewish people. Says the Mishnah, Lo Haria Shor Karia Mave. The characteristics of the ox are not the same as the Mave. Lo Haria Mave, and the characteristics of the Mave are not the same as the ox, Karia Shor. And both the ox and the Mave have animation of life. They both have Ruach Kayim. Neither one of them is like the Haria Eish. They're not like fire. The characteristics of fire are She'im Bo Ruach Kayim. Fire is not alive. And that fire, an ox and Mave, which are things that do damage by moving, they're not like the Haria Bor. They're not like the characteristics of the pit. That the pit is stationary. It doesn't move when it does its damage. What's the tzara shava shaban? What's the common denominator of these four primary sources of damage? Shedarkan lahazik, that their primary, that the common denominator is that all of these things do damage, ushmirasan alecha, and you're responsible to watch it. Because shahizik, so they all do damage and you're responsible. And when they do the damage, chav hamazik l'shalem tashlumi nezek, the person who is responsible for this act, for this item, he has to pay the full payment of the damages b'meitav haaretz, from the best of the land, from the edis of the karka. Ironically, it says from the best of the land. That's another connection to our parsha, because Parshas Vayera, the Lot's wife, what was her name? According to Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, some versions are it's Iris, and some versions say it's Edis. So she's from this week's parsha also. So the Gemara asked the question, Midikatani Avo, is from the fact that it says that there are primary categories of damage. Miklal Dika Toados, this proves that there is also Toados, secondary categories of damages. So now we ask the question, Toldos saying Kayotzi Ben, Olav Kayotzi Ben, are these secondary sources of damage, they have the same halachos as the primary source or not? Gabe Shabbos Tanan, with respect to Shabbos, we learned Avos Muachos Arbaim Chasar Achas. There are 39 primary categories of prohibited work. And Avos we call the Ika Toados. So we see that there are secondary categories of prohibited work. But there, with respect to Shabbos, we say Toldos and Kayotzi Ben. The secondary sources of Shabbos are like the primary sources. Moshna Av Chatas, Moshna Tolada Chatas. Whether it's the primary source, you have to bring a sin offering, or whether it's a secondary source, you have to bring a sin offering. Moshna Av skill, Moshna Tolada skill. Whether it's a primary source, you get stoned if you violate it on purpose, or it's a secondary source. What's the distinction between a primary source and a secondary source? The distinction is the distinction is that let's say you do two primary activities at the same time, two primary categories, you have to bring two separate sin offerings. Or if you bring two different toadas from two different primary categories, you also have to bring 2 separate sin offerings. Aval, Chada, you're liable for each one. However, if you do Ilu Avid if you do the primary one with its own derivative, then you would only have to bring 1 sin offering because you've done with at the same time you didn't realize that this was a prohibited activity. Into the Av and the Tawada, you have to bring only one chatas. Rabbi Eliezer, and the Gemara asks, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the Mechayev Atawada b'makom Av. Rabbi Eliezer says that even if you do a Tawada and Av, you have to also bring 2 chatas. Then according to Rabbi Eliezer, Amai Karilei Av, Amai Karilei Tawada. Why is it called a primary and why is it called a Tawada? So Rabbi Eliezer's answer is Hachtave b'Mishkan. It's just nomenclature. The one that was in the Mishkan, the activity that was done in the Mishkan, we call it an Av, Karilei Av. Hachtov in the Mishkan. The one that was not in the Mishkan, Karilei Tawada, we call it Tawada. That's just called the Tawada. So that's one type of primary, that's one type of Av and Tawada. And there the Tawados are Kayotze Ben. They have the same law. But, says the Mishnah, says the Gemara, Gabe Tumos, with respect to laws of impurity, where we also have Avos v'Tawados. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah in Kalim. Avos Tumah, what are the primary categories of Tumah? Sheretz, one of the 8 roadies, creepy crawly creatures. Hashchava Zera, if you have male seed. Utame Mace, and somebody who touched a dead body. These are all called Avos Tumah. What about a dead body itself? Rashi tells us that's called the Avi Avos Tumah. What's the distinction between an Avatuma and a Tawada? Rashi tells us that a person, a primary source of Tumah, can make person and utensils Tameh, whereas a Tawada makes also liquids Tameh. That's a distinction according to Rashi. But it cannot, a Tawada cannot make a person and utensils Tameh. So now back to the Gemara. Gemara says, on the top of Beis Amabes, the Gemara says, Milu Tawados, Ochen Umashkin. And it says in the Gemara, so that these are the primary sources of Tumah, but Toldos saying, but when it comes to the primary sources of Tumah, the derivatives, the Toldos, they don't have the same halacha. How so? A person makes a human and utensils tamei, you tawados, ochun ma'ashkim tamei, adam mekelim more tamei. Whereas a person makes the person and the utensils tamei, whereas the tawados only makes food and liquid items tamei, but not a person and utensils. So you see that by Tumah, the Avos and the Tawados are different. And so if that's the case, the Gemara asks the question, Tawados, Hachamai, with respect to the Avos and the Tawados of the primary sources of damage, are the Tawados like the Avos like Shabbos, or are they not like the Tawados, are they not like the Avos like the laws of Tumah? So Amar Papa, Yeshman Kayotzi Ben, Yeshman Lab Kayotzi Ben. So what's the question, Hachamai? Rashi says the Tawados to Shabbos, are they like Avos or not? Meaning, are they like the Avos like Shabbos or not? And what's the question? Do we say, do you pay the full damages, or maybe you don't pay the full damages? Because by the Avos, you pay the full damages. So Rashi says that's the question. And so the answer says, Rav Papa, Yeshman Kayotzi Ben. There's some Toados that are like the Avos. Yeshman Lav Kayotzi Ben. And there are some that are not like the Avos. So that's what he says. Hold on. I have to stop this. Okay. So comes along the Gemara. Tana Rabbana. The Gemara is going to try and explain what our Papa says. Our Papa is saying that there are some Toados that are like the Avos by Nezikin, and there are some that are not like it. So the Gemara, in order to figure this out, says, okay, let's try and figure this out. Tana Rabbana Gimel Avos Nemru Bashor. As it relates to the ox, which we said was one of the primary sources of damages, which is the ox, there are three things that are included in this category of the ox that does damage: the karen, the shane, and the regel. Karen is where you gore. The shane is where the ox eats and does damage by eating the other person's food. And the regel, where it does damage with its foot by trampling on things. A karen, a shane, and the regel. And the Gemara says, Karen Minon, how do we know that goring is a primary source of damage coming from the ox? The Tana Rabbanan ki yigach, if the ox will gore. It says in the Torah, when the ox gores, and ein negicha el b'karen. How do you gore? You gore with a horn, as it says, Vayaslo Tzidkaya ben Kenana. Tzidkaya ben Kenana took when he went to Achav and he was telling him about the fact that the Jewish people will be victorious in battle, and he was a false prophet. He said he took karne barzel, he took horns of iron, he took a symbolism, he took the horns of iron, and he said, you're going to gore Aram with these horns. The Omer, and so we see from here that goring of an ox is with horns. So that's how we know Karen is a primary source of damagings. And furthermore, we have another pasuk that says, "Bechor sharohar darlo v'karnei re'im karnav." The ox is its beauty, v'karnei re'im karnav, and its horns, the horns of the re'im are its horns. V'hem amim yinagach, it will gore with them. So the Gemara wants to know, why do we need two psukim? Ma'eva omer. Why do we need two psukim to tell us that goring is with horns, with Karen? Gemara says we need two psukim because you might have said, and because you might have said, well, we can't learn it out from the fact that it has a pasuk from Malachim, so therefore we need another pasuk from Devarim to tell us that the goring of the ox is with its horns. So the Gemara says, and therefore, Tashma b'chor sharo hadar, and therefore when you have the pasuk of the ox that gores, b'chor sharo hadar. And so therefore he has to learn this pasuk from b'chor sharo hadar. The high melafu. So the Gemara asked the question. You can't give that answer. You can't give that question. You can't give that answer because is this a proof? You can't give a proof from the pasuk in Malachim because that's a giway milsa ba'amahu than a gicha b'karnu. That's just a revelation. It's just explaining it. It's not teaching us about the Torah. It's a giway milsa ba'amahu. We're not learning out from the pasuk in Malachim. So it's telling us, meaning to say as follows: if you want to say you can't, the reason why we need a pasuk from Devarim is because the pasuk you can't learn out from the pasuk in Malachim that goring is with a horn, but you're not learning it out from the pasuk in Malachim. That's just the giway milsa ba'amahu than the gicha b'karnu. That's just like defining the word. It's not a limud. It's not instruction. It's just we're learning out from the context that goring is with horns. Ella, so the Gemara says, no, what's the reason why we need the two psukim? You might have thought, when the Torah says that if you gore if the animal gores 3 times, which is what's called an ox that has the predisposition to gore, it's called a shor muad. And there you pay full damages, but if it's just the first time, it's just half damages, which is called a short tam. You might have thought that distinction was only made hanimili betlusha. That's only if it's an ox with the horns of an ox that are no longer connected to the ox. You're just using it as an instrument, as a tool, as a weapon, like from the verse from Malachim. But if it's an ox that was actually, if the horns were actually connected, I might have said, well, since the horns are actually on the ox, I might have thought that from the very beginning, it's always a shor muad, and you always pay full damages. So therefore, Tashma, of course, the Karnei Reim Karnaf, to teach us this idea that the first few times until it's a muad, it's you don't pay full damages. The Tawada, the Karen Mai. So if we're saying that Karen is a primary source of one of the categories of damages, what's a derivative of it? Negifa, Neshicha, Ravitzo, Ve'ita. Negifa is pushing, Neshicha is biting, Ravitza is crouching, Ube'ita is kicking. So the Gemara asks the question, Ma'ishna Negicha, the Kariway Ab. Why is Negicha, the Karen, called a primary source of damages? Because it says Kiyigach, because it says in the Torah, Kiyigach. On the Gifa Nami, so the pushing should also be called a primary source of damage, because it says Kiyigov. And so therefore it should also be considered an Av. So the Gemara says, no, Hai Negifa Negichai. No, that pushing really just doesn't mean, that word Kiyigov really means goring. The Tanya, Pasach Negifa Vasim Negicha. The Torah starts with the pasuk of Yigov, and it concludes with the pasuk of Kiyigach. Kiyigach. So really, it starts with Kiyigach and it concludes with Kiyigov to tell us what? To tell us, hold on, we have a little gears issue here. We go to the side. Pasach HaKosov b'negifa v'sim b'negicha. Torah starts with Yigov and concludes with Yigach to tell us Zui Negifa, Zui Negicha. To tell us that they're the same thing. So Maishna, so if that's the case, Maishna Gabe Adam, but with respect to a person, Dechsiv Ki Yigach, Maishna Gabe Dechsiv Ki Yigov. So why with respect to the with respect to a person, if an ox scores a person, does it say ki yigach? Why if an ox scores another animal, does it say ki yigach? So the Gemara answers, Adam the Islam Mazola, a person has his own mazel, meaning to say he has the ability to watch his body. So therefore it says ki yigach, because yigach implies that the ox has to have like a plan to gore him. But behema the Islam Mazola ksiv ki yigach. But an animal doesn't know how to protect itself as well. Excuse me. There it says ki yigov. So the Gemara said, and the Gemara is teaching us something in a roundabout way to tell us that if an ox if something is predisposed to gore a human, it's a muad to gore a human, it's already predisposed to gore an animal. However, and we don't say it's a tam vis-a-vis if it gores an animal. Whereas muad l'be'ema, if a person is predisposed to gore an animal, it's not necessarily predisposed to gore a person. And so if the ox is predisposed to gore an animal, it's not necessarily predisposed to gore a person, and therefore it's considered a tam vis-a-vis a person. So the Gemara said, what are the tolados of Karen? We said pushing and biting and crouching on something and kicking. So the Gemara says, well, how is biting a derivative of Karen? Nishicha tolada the sheni. Isn't that a derivative of tooth? Gemara says, no. It's not. Whoa, Shein Yeshanoa Zika. Here we have a distinction. By tooth, a derivative of tooth is something where the ox that does the benefit, that does the uses its tooth, gets benefit from it, like eating. Ha Ena Noa Zika. Here, the one who is eating or biting doesn't get any benefit. And Ravitzu Bita, and then the Gemara asks, crouching and kicking to others to regularly. These are derivatives not of goring, but of the foot. Where it says no. Well, regel hazika matzoi, by foot, the damage is expected, meaning to say when the animal walks, it always tramples. Hani ein hazika matzoi. This one, the damage is not always expected, meaning to say, therefore, it's considered a derivative of goring, because goring is something that's not hazeko matzoi. We're starting to define the characteristics of goring. It's not as common, and also it doesn't get any benefit. And so therefore, it pays half damages like the goring. So we see from here, so the Gemara says, so the Gemara goes back to what Rav Papa we said. So we say, Ela Toldos saying, Lav Kayotzibin, the Amar Rav Papa, ahai. So Rav Papa says that there are some who the Tolados are like it, and some the Tolados are not like it. What does he mean when he says the Tolados, the derivatives, are not like it? Ilay Ma'ahani, if you want to say it with reference to these, Maishna Karen, the Kavanaso Ahazik, and the Monchash Miraso Alecha. Aninami Kavanaso Ahazik, Monchash Miraso Alecha. If you want to say that the reference is to the derivatives of goring, why would we say that it has a different halacha? There should be the same exact law as goring, because by goring, your intent is to do damage of the ox, and you're responsible to watch it. Also, these things, their intent is to do damage, and it's your responsibility to do damage. Ella, so the Gemara says, okay, Tolados, to Karen, the derivatives of goring have the same halacha as the goring. V'chika amar Papa ashen v'regel. And when Rav Papa says that there are some derivatives that have a different law than the primary sources, that's a reference to tooth and foot, and we'll take that up, God willing, on the Daf Yomi for Sunday. A big shkoyach to everybody, and good Shabbos.